Does this even come as a surprise? I've seeded the idea in 2020. Since the new year, which has so far been short, I've been probably my most productive in a long time. I'm editing together either a documentary or a series of documentaries, and this will probably take me all of 2021. I'm still continuing to dance, as this vlog is titled Breaking Badass still. But I've come to the conclusion that the pandemic forced a necessary break for me and a necessary opportunity. I've accumulated so many life-changing, self-actualizing experiences, but since 2013 to 2020, I'd been in a continual state of experiencing and in sporadic spurts creative. Now obviously, even live travel vlogging and live vlogging in any form is a form of creativity, but what I meant is storytelling. As a youngin', I actually penned my fair share of fan fictions, and I think that's a part of me that's been largely dormant, except for a brief YouTube series, Slutty Sundays, in 2017. But honestly, part of why cutting and editing together a documentary series is fun is because I can travel basically through my own experience, and that's essentially the same to me as traveling. Obviously, real traveling has the high quality, but the latency between me watching and me traveling is a lot lower than you would expect. So, in that case, I'm occupied. Or maybe, more accurately, I'm as occupied as I need to be until the fucking world resolves itself. Some people mistakenly think that it's just one country holding me down. It's the country that I live in, Canada. But really, the whole world has a crisis of risk management. Why I phrase it as such is because the pandemic has collectively caused society at large around the world to really lose touch with its risk management and decision making, if there ever was. Okay? Even in an organized, orderly country like Canada, which probably has better systems and regulations than most, I still think humans who created those systems are susceptible, and that's what we learn as engineers. I'm a human, I'm susceptible. So the thing is that maybe we've never actually had a conversation writ large about what's our risk tolerance as a society. Because part of the problem is that statistically, there are some things that, at least on paper, are deadlier than COVID, but we've handled them differently. So we take a very hodgepodge approach, or at least from an outsider with risk experience, to me, it's hodgepodge. Now, the reality is that things of this sort, of this magnitude, will always be hodgepodge, because that's, by definition, what an emergency is, okay? That's what an emergency is. If you could react perfectly in an emergency, I'd argue that that's actually no longer an emergency, because nobody's an oracle, and anybody who is such probably benefited from a lot of luck rather than skill. So this is beyond me, beyond Canada. This is about the countries that I would prefer to travel to. Any country that's probably going to be open and easier to navigate is a country that I've already traveled to. The back 93 are more difficult. So I've been to 101, and it really depends on how you calculate the UN countries, but let's say I have anywhere from 93 to 95 left. The back end is the more difficult end. That's why it's a difficult decision for me to make, because those countries, as they were before the pandemic, were already right on the cusp of my tolerance. If you add a pandemic on top, what do I do? So actually, instead of even thinking about that, I've decided to pivot, which is what I'm very good at. I pivoted in 2020 to breakdancing, and I'm still going to progress my breakdancing because that's been a lot of fun, and that's a necessary exercise for me. For me, that is fundamental to me staying healthy and sane. What I'm going to do is add on top of that my documentary project, and I think that'll keep me occupied long enough before I really have to think about how to tackle the world as it is the new world. The thing is that obviously the pandemic has affected everybody in large, massive ways, but maybe the way it's affected adventure travelers is different because we're a small population, we're a niche market, and nobody's really sitting there thinking about how to help us or how to help us get back on the road. If anything, I think our community has been spotlighted in a way that I think casts a weird pall over us. And I have to think about what I think of that. Upon returning from Turkey in March of 2020, at the beginning-ish of the pandemic, I had more visceral feelings about it because I was just fresh off the road, and I felt that adventure travelers were being demonized, but the timing was also different. For example, the day that I flew from Canada, Canada's own government assessment was still low risk for traveling during what was happening. Then, while I was gone, they suddenly escalated from low to high. And then everything happens. Okay? But now people who leave for trips, for travel, for leisure travel, they face a completely different set of situations and circumstances than I faced in March. And I think the new circumstances are stricter, and they make already risky countries probably out of reach for me. So instead of thinking about how to ram my head against a wall, which is what adventure traveling during this time would be like, I'm pivoting to things that make me happy. I've always been the type of person, although realist, a creative person as well. And a constraint is just another way to force your mind to find an opportunity. And this is what I'm doing. I'm finding opportunities. So my first opportunity is dancing. already mentioned what this week's new choreography was last week. I'm finally paying tribute to my good old Canadian boys, Shawn Mendes and Justin Bieber. I'm also dressed like a monster. A monster. That song is a bit of a different type of choreography for me. It's like an emotive piece, which is more sentimental. Dancing as an art form is emotive in every single sense and in every style. But there are different kinds of emotive, and I think most of my previous choreographies were less sentimental, more upbeat, more dance. But this song connected with me. I explained a little bit last week why. This life is suffering for every single person. And Shawn Mendes, Justin Bieber, Jeff Bezos, they're all human, so they all suffer as well. In reviewing my footage for my upcoming documentary series, I realized that I still have a lot of complex philosophical problems to resolve in my value system. I've explained before that for me, in some ways, me adventuring and experiencing new things is me seeking input data and evidence to build my value system. I have always rejected top-down indoctrination, never been good at just listening even to science. For example, as an engineer, I actually invested a lot of time to derive equations. One of my professors even warned me that if I wasted all my time deriving the equations, I'd miss out on the application side, which is a large part of engineering. But for me, I needed to know that I could follow the logical pattern of where the equation came from, based on first principles of science, mathematics, and what you would call the hard thinking. I'm like that about mostly anything in life. I need to either think things through myself, or I need someone smart and trustworthy to present a logical case for me, like a lawyer would. So that's why often it takes me a lot of time to analyze and contextualize my experiences. But once I do, I'm often in a sense of reinterpreting and constant updating. Because like any person, I'll experience more new things. And sometimes those new things challenge my existing system in small or large ways. So essentially, I'm always actively updating the value system based on the input data of experiences that I encounter. Well, that's actually what I'm dedicated to most. So I give no fucks about how I interact with people, because I know enough biology to know that I'm actually not exactly interacting with people. I'm interacting with throwaway survival machines, of which I'm also one of them. But part of the problem is that people who've never gone through this personal experience I'm discussing right now are literally just amalgamations of their genes and things around them. And I find I connect very little with people who've never at least thought about things critically. Now, obviously, as someone who's gone through the system, gone through the process, I know that it's very difficult. When I think about my old self and my younger self, I think of someone who's half-baked. In me, I've always known that I needed to think things through for myself, but obviously there were some social constructions there. For example, I tended to overvalue education and career a lot because I already knew that family, marriage, kids were completely out of the picture for me. So I was halfway there. But in some ways you can argue still that education, did I really overestimate or overstate it? Because that's helped me become a critical thinker, and that's helped me then build my value system. I think it's very difficult to have expected any human being to just be born a complete blank slate. I mean, largely, when you're talking about your upbringing, you literally have no choice. You have no choice of where you're born, who your parents are, none whatsoever. And that imprints on you a lot of what you become. So, the brain is still live wired. We can change those perceptions, change those long-held beliefs, behaviors, and actions, but it takes a lot of applied deliberation and dedication. Well, that's why I couple it with fun things. So dancing, as much as it's transformative, it's also fun. Because I've always liked the relationship that I have with my body. I also, more so, really relish the strange shapes that I can bend my body in, the flexibility, the strength, and all of that. So instead of always telling myself, okay, I need to do this to stay healthy, that's one part of it. But I think dedication comes from just true, genuine enjoyment of what you're doing. That's a difficult thing in today's world because we have our attention split in so many different ways. We arguably have more choice than ever, but then for some reason, the people that I've met are a lot less dedicated to things than ever. So, back to my dedication, dancing. I'm doing 3 passes, so that means I have to squeeze the last one in. Thank you to my audience for clapping. Yeah, please don't let me fall. So I've been thinking during this entire vlog. Vancouver's been raining for probably the last week or so, and today was a brief reprieve, but the floor is still mucky and messy. And that's part of the problem with wearing costumes, because the clothing I'm also trying to keep in a reasonable condition, because I'm only wearing it the half minute, I mean for the half an hour, that's it. So it is what it is. It largely went alright because it's less cardio footwork heavy and more emotive precision. So that makes it easier for me to control my movements. In some where I have to throw my body around, like my last new pop choreography to Let's Groove, that one's a lot easier to slip on. So I'm happy that this has worked out. I think that even if it does rain, I have a number of different kinds of setups that I can use, but I'll always be outdoors because that's actually what's probably the fundamental thing that keeps me grounded. The natural world. We're part of the natural world. We're also animals. Some people take exception to that, but it's a biological fact. So I'm trying to understand why people have such a contention with the natural world, but if you have a deep connection with it, you're gonna feel quite trapped just being inside all the time. that's a suggestion that I would suggest to others. Just be outside as much as possible. Day by day, I'm outside for a good 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours a day. So I'm thinking part of the cabin fever element of this pandemic is people are also inside. Well, inside is also how the disease spreads, so I mean, it just makes sense to be outside. Anybody who thinks it's too cold, like, get it together. This is barely anything. Out there all the time, sometimes I'm wearing a lot less clothes. The shirt's actually very warm, so, I mean, sometimes you just gotta fucking solve problems instead of creating them. Okay? Preach, rant, over.